Hi, I'm Julius. So when you're starting out with Prometheus, one of the first things you'll typically want to do is to monitor your Linux systems, that is, if you have any, or any other types of Unix systems as well. And fortunately, this is actually really easy with Prometheus. So while Linux doesn't expose Prometheus-compatible metrics on its own, right? It doesn't have an HTTP server serving Prometheus-compatible metrics. The Prometheus team publishes the Node Exporter project, which is a small binary you can run on any Linux or different kind of Unix hosts that Prometheus can then scrape, and the Node Exporter fetches metrics from the underlying system and reports them back to Prometheus. So in this video, we're going to download and run the Node Exporter, and then we're going to scrape it with Prometheus and look at some of the resulting metrics to see what you can do with them. All right, let's go. Okay, let's start by downloading the Node Exporter. For that, we're going to go to the Prometheus homepage at prometheus.io and head to the download section. And in here, we're going to go to the Node Exporter section. Now, here there are two download links. One is for macOS and the other one is for Linux on AMD 64. But if you're on a different operating system or architecture, just check out the release notes of the Node Exporter. And there might be just the Unix system operating system and architecture that you need in here as well. I am on Linux and AMD 64, so I will just download that one. All right, and once that's downloaded, I'll switch over to the terminal here and I'll unpack the tarball that we just downloaded. Then I'll switch into the unpacked directory, and we can see that there's a Node Exporter binary in here, and the Node Exporter is written in Go. So you can just start this binary without installing any other dependencies on your system. Now, this binary does take a bunch of flags that you can optionally set, but by default, if you just start it without any flags, it will expose a reasonable set of metrics. Now, most of these flags just allow you to enable or disable different collector modules, and you'll see that some are disabled by default and others are enabled by default. And the Node Exporter's documentation in the README-MD gives you a good overview over all the available collector modules and what they mean. So you have the ones that are enabled by default over here. And there's a description of each of them that just tells you what kinds of metrics there actually are and what operating systems they are available on. And then there's also a list of ones that are disabled by default. Now, if you need to enable one that is disabled by default, you can just set that --collector.name flag. Or if you want to disable one that is enabled by default, for example, if it's producing too many metrics that you don't care about, you can set the --no-collector.name of the collector flag. And besides enabling or disabling these collector modules, there's also some command line flags that allow you to change the behavior, like what kinds of metrics they should actually output for which file systems and so on. For example, this collector.filesystem.fs types -exclude flag allows you to configure with a regular expression which file systems to exclude from the exposed metrics. So by default, the regular expression here excludes a lot of file systems that are pseudo file systems and not real ones, or maybe ones that belong to containers that tell you less about the actual host that the Node Exporter is running on. So by default, these are excluded. Also, by default, the Node Exporter will start listening on port 9100. So if we just start the Node Exporter without any flags, it will expose a reasonable set of metrics about the host it's running on, and it will start listening on this port. So let's start it. And we can see that it is running now. So let's head over to a web browser here. If we head to that port on 9100 and go to the metrics page, we can see a lot of metrics exposed about the host here. So first of all, we have some metrics that are actually about the Node Exporter itself and its Go runtime. We don't care about those at the moment. But if we scroll down, we see a lot of metrics that are prefixed with node _. And those are about the node that this Node Exporter is running on. So we have cooling device states, we have all kinds of metrics about the CPU, we will see memory metrics if we search for them, right? We'll also see network metrics and all kinds of other metrics that are enabled in these collector modules. All right. So let's make Prometheus actually scrape these metrics. So I do have a Prometheus server running here already, which is not scraping the node exporter at the moment. If you don't have a Prometheus server yet, check out my video about setting up a minimal Prometheus setup in the corner up here. Once you have that, you can just go into your Prometheus configuration file and you'll want to add another job for the node exporter. In this case, we are running one node exporter target, but if you had multiple, you would often want to group them under the same node exporter job. In this case, right, my node exporter is just running on the same host on port 9100. So I'm going to add a scrape configuration to make Prometheus scrape that on a periodic basis. At the moment, my Prometheus server is scraping metrics from its targets every 15 seconds. So let's save that and start Prometheus again. Now, if we go over to Prometheus again here, and we check out the targets page, we should be seeing that Prometheus is scraping both itself and the node exporter correctly. Now, I'll just give this a couple of minutes to collect some data that we can play around with. All right, so let's head over to the graph page here to play around with the collected data. If you type node underscore into the expression input field, you will see all the different metrics starting with that prefix. So those are all the different node exporter metrics. And if you just hit the down button, you can also see the help text on the right, give you a little hint about what all these metrics are about. As an example, let's just have a look at CPU usage. So for that, there's a node CPU seconds total metric here that gives us the number of seconds that this machine has spent since it was booted for every combination of CPU core and usage mode. So idle, IO-wait, IRQ, and so on. And all these time series here are counters, right? The cumulative number of seconds since the system has booted. So if you just graph them as is, they will just keep on going up and they won't look too interesting. So what you usually will want to do is wrap the rate function around this to get some kind of current usage. In this case, the usage ratio in cores for every combination of core and the mode. Now, if you want to understand exactly why the rate function works in this context the way it does, do just check out my monitoring Linux host metrics training. I go into all that. I explain the rate function here, why it works the way it does, and also go into many, many other metrics that are relevant for the host and how you can query them in meaningful ways. And let's just have a look at one more example metric, in this case, network usage. So there's many network metrics exposed by the node exporter, but there's one about the number of received bytes, and there's also one about the number of transmitted bytes. So incoming and outgoing number of bytes. Let's go for the received ones for now here, and we'll see this metric reporting for every interface on this machine, how many bytes have been received since the machine booted up. So again, these are counters. And to get something meaningful out of them, we will want to, again, wrap the rate function around this metric to see per second how many bytes we are receiving. Now, finally, you might also want to create a Grafana dashboard for your host metrics. If you don't have Grafana yet, check out my other video in the corner here for getting started with Grafana. Now, once you have Grafana, luckily someone already made a really great node exporter dashboard. So this is the node exporter full dashboard with the ID 1816 down here. So I will just copy that one. And I will go over to Grafana, to the dashboards menu, click on import. And then I just need to enter that dashboard ID, click load. And the only thing I need to do before fully importing this dashboard is to choose a data source to connect it to. So in this Grafana install, I have one default Prometheus data source. That's the one I'm going to select. And then I'm just going to click import. And we will see this dashboard being created with all the node metrics here. So let me just switch this over to only show the last hour. And we can see that there's a first row here showing a quick system overview and the system resource usage. And then you see a lot more detail in the following rows about CPU memory, network, and disk usage. And if you scroll down here, you see really metrics about all the different subsystems that the node exporter reports on. For example, file system metrics here, we can see all the details of that. All right, so I hope this was useful to get you started monitoring your Linux hosts with Prometheus. And of course, we really only touched on the surface here. If you would like to learn more about all the different groups of metrics, how you can query them properly, which ones you might even want to alert on, check out my monitoring Linux hosts training on training.promlabs.com. And also please support the channel by liking and subscribing. Also, maybe comment down below which kinds of videos you would like to see in the future. And then I hope I'll see you soon.